Welcome to the Reimagined Energy podcast. In this remix episode on climate action, we're bringing together voices from across Atlantic Canada who are tackling one of the biggest challenges of our time. From municipal leaders driving bold climate plans to educators helping communities make sense of sustainability, to organizations shifting everyday behaviors. This conversation explores how collective action is reshaping our path to net zero. So, because I've been talking to a lot of people across Canada, and Halifax has really been put on the map, in terms of clean initiatives or green projects, that type of thing. So, where is Halifax currently with all of that right now?
Yeah, I'd say we are a leading city in Canada, and some people say beyond, with the new climate plan that we have. So we were an early adopter of doing greenhouse gas inventories in the 90s. We were one of the early adopters for the Partners for Climate Protection program that's run nationally. And we've had climate plans for decades and decades. But we really needed, like with all the new climate science coming out, the new net zero ambitions and what we were seeing on the ground with what's happening in Halifax with hurricanes and temperature changes and all kinds of things, we really wanted to redo our entire plan and also layer in climate adaptation. So like preparing for impacts. And so I think our plan, it's founded in science. So it's not what can we do that's possible, that's not too tricky. It's what do we need to do that science says we need to do, regardless of the barriers that we're facing and all of the work it's going to take and the investment that's needed to try and get to our 2030 and 2050 targets. And that's something that not every other plan has. And a lot of cities have looked to us to understand how we developed our plan, who we used to help us in the consulting world and things like that, and for advice. And a lot of people have since put forward some really amazing climate plans. And there were lots before us as well. Like Toronto's Transform TO plan is amazing. Vancouver's always been a leader in the space. We're not the only ones. But I think this plan has really put us on the map because we're being quite brave with our leadership. Our council's made serious commitments and now funding commitments to make sure it's not just a plan that sits on the shelf, that we're actually trying to mobilize and really transform our city and our systems to address the climate crisis.
So is that how Halifax, Halifax 2050, is that under that umbrella?
So Halifax is the name of the climate plan. So the ACT in Halifax stands for Acting on Climate Together. It's a little cheesy, but it's really about needing all of our partners, other levels of government, public, business, utilities to all come together, because as a city, we only directly control about 2% of the overall emissions that happen in our city. And so, we can influence and drive some of the changes for the other partners, but it's really about working all together to reduce the barriers and figure out the new policy required and like where's the financing coming from and all the different pieces to just try and go faster and bigger, because we've been way too slow in working on climate change for over 30 years. Like we've known it's a problem for a really long time. And one other thing about leading with this climate plan, I'd say, is the way that we developed it. So we really tried to include everybody right from the start. We were very intentional and probably did one of the better jobs as a city government with engaging everybody, all different communities, our Mi'kmaq population, our African Nova Scotian communities, nonprofits, everybody, academics, and we kind of co-created the plan together and approved in principle to the net zero by 2050 target. And we had these big planning sessions. It was all right before COVID, so they were in person. And we really had this lens of prioritizing vulnerable communities and vulnerable infrastructure and vulnerable ecosystems, and just really trying to have, happy, healthy communities that thrive, because you're not going to be prepared for climate impacts if you're already struggling in different ways. So there's a real social and equity lens to the work that we do.
Why is it important to invest in climate initiatives now?
Well, we should have done it a long time ago, but better late than never. And it's really about like we really have a narrowing window of time to drive down our emissions. Like our ethically determined carbon budget for the city, we're set to blow it by like 2027 or 2028 if we keep with the more business as usual approach to doing things. And if the whole world does that, every city, every province, every country keeps on going too slowly, we're going to see the repercussions of that warming for a really long time. Like if we were to stop emitting all greenhouse gas emissions today, we'd still have impacts for years and years to come, right? So we really need to be looking at solutions that shift our energy system entirely, reduce the energy demand of our buildings, change our transportation system, get more people in buses and on active transportation, as well as switching to EVs, like all these kinds of things. It takes like a massive effort to change something that's so entrenched in the way we've done things as a society for a really long time. Yeah.
That that's really amazing. I mean, um, so getting back to your earlier answer about Halifax and Hala Act 2050, you said you consulted with businesses and also with residents as well. So what can residents do? What can people do to advance this a little bit further?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one that we hear a lot. There's a real feeling of overwhelm and like a lack of power around individual work in climate change. So much of it is needed to be done by government, by utilities, by the engineers, by the scientists, right? So we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we have a page on our website about things to think about if you are wanting to take action. First of all, voting is really important. Voting for people who reflect your values and beliefs that are environment and climate related, as well as others. Also, voting with your dollars. Consumer power is a very real thing. It speaks to a lot of people. And, you can make choices in your daily purchases and your larger purchases that have a really big environmental impact, both positive or negative. So everything from what car you might purchase next to the packaging of a bottle of medicine versus a different company's bottle of medicine, all of that, how you travel from A to B, all of those things have a lot of impact. And really, we say that it's a lot of drops in the bucket still makes a really full bucket. So all the smaller choices, like using a reusable coffee mug, not buying bottled water when you don't need to, just reducing how much stuff you buy and where you buy it from. Is it coming from overseas? Because there's a lot of emissions related to transportation of goods. All of those things, it's like those little things in your daily life, like, okay, what could I change that would make me feel like I'm doing something that's not too uncomfortable for me? Like, what's a good step? And then once that feels good, maybe you want to take another step. Things like that. The food you purchase, really climate is everywhere. It's really about like a healthy planet. And so there's a lot that can be done. Also volunteering or diving in on a project and just thinking about climate in your job, whatever your job may be, because there's climate considerations really across all jobs.
That's amazing. Yeah, like you said, climate is everywhere. And in an earlier conversation, you mentioned how Halifax, it can only directly control the 2%, of greenhouse gases in the municipality. So where can the blanks be filled in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we actually have a very large, it was called a Halifax stakeholder network. It's the group of people, it's over 100 organizations that came together to create the plan. We've kept that alive, and we meet every 3 or 4 months, and we try and drive action amongst ourselves. We update each other on important new pieces of policy or funding opportunities, new things that are happening, both locally all the way to internationally. And we've trained people in that network in the collective impact approach to trying to do climate change work. So really trying to work in these faster planning cycles and think beyond long-term planning that doesn't really work because everything's changing so quickly in the climate space. Lots of new tech advances and policy changes and things like that, right? So we're trying to like figure out how to best foster that network for change. And we talk about, shared accountability and responsibility, not just internal with all the different departments of HRM, of the municipality itself, but also accountability of others, of other levels of government, of the private sector, and things like that. And we have a lot of different things on the go. One really exciting one is we just got a bunch of CEOs of major organizations and employers in the city to co-create this climate action charter with us. And we did it with the Halifax Partnership. It's actually an action in the economic strategy, the new inclusive economic strategy that we have for the city. It's a 5-year plan. And one of the actions was to develop this CEO charter similar to the public safety charter that we have in the province that puts people before profits. So there was Don Bureau of NSCC had this great idea like, hey, why don't we think about a charter for climate? And there's 10 kind of statements in it. And, there were utilities signing on, academic institutions, businesses, all kinds of really influential people in our city signing on. That they're going to go a bit further with climate. They're going to think about these 10 statements and try and drive climate action within their businesses. And it's all different sizes of businesses, different types of work. And then the partnership and the city are going to support that network of CEOs that are going to do that, because we really need the private sector to play a big role in this too. So we're just trying to get into every little nook and cranny. We're running an education campaign in all of our libraries right now about climate change and trying to hear from people on what they have questions about, what they're concerned about, what they would like to see from the city to move forward. So we've got a lot. We're doing like grants, these little climate action challenges where community groups get small grants and they get training to like move their climate ideas forward, all kinds of things.
Oh, that's awesome. And it has to start somewhere. So, what shifts have you seen in the past 10 years in the energy sector?
Well, it's been interesting, as the world kind of wakes up to the impacts of burning fossil fuels.
Yeah.
We're seeing that, renewables and clean energy sources, including nuclear, are really becoming much more accepted and mainstream. So although I've been working in the nuclear industry for the last 15 years, we're just seeing a lot more activity. And so over the last 5 years, I've been working on the Advanced Reactor Development Program. And we are just, the world is starting to see that, we can't get to net zero with renewables alone. And when you look for baseload power, nuclear is it. So we're seeing a huge shift towards nuclear energy.
Interesting. Because also energy demand is growing, with the use of electric vehicles on the market. There's a lot more drain or strain on the way that energy is being consumed. What needs to happen to prepare for the future?
Yes, there's a lot in front of us, and I think the good news is the technology's there, and so we all really need to just lean in together and understand how to use the existing technology. We're looking at, there's been many workshops happening across Canada to look at how to get to net zero by 2050. And most of those workshops are showing that electricity requirements are going to, double or 2.5 times that of what we have today.
Wow.
And so how do we prepare for that? We need to actually look at all of the tools in our toolbox. We need to look to wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, the 4 key existing technologies for clean energy. And we need to look at storage and newer technologies like geothermal and biofuels.
Interesting, because the grid stability, is important. There's going to be peaks and valleys, and so that needs to happen. So, what projects are happening in the region? I guess the Atlantic Canada region that can ensure that power is consistent.
Right. So we are, and I'm going to give it from, give you my perspective from New Brunswick's point of view, and
Hmm.
that's really where my focus is. But I will assume that Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland are all looking at, their own integrated resource plans for their provinces and how all of the interconnections work. And so we do buy power from Quebec. We will be strengthening our ties to Quebec, strengthening our ties to Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. And so we need to make sure that the grid, the infrastructure of the grid remains, that the maintenance is carried out and that remains strong for us. But now what do we put on that grid is just as important. I'll give you an example of what we have to look at when we're looking at grid stability. We had the coldest day of the year was February 4th of 2023, and that's where we hit our peak. And we needed approximately 4,000 megawatts of energy to meet that peak demand. We had very little wind available to us because it was very windy. The wind was howling through the province, and wind turbines don't operate well under high winds or low winds. And it's the middle of the night. There's not a lot of solar energy required, so we had to use all of the resources that we had in our at our disposal. I would assume that Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador will be looking at that same requirement. How do we meet our demands, especially in the wintertime for Canada? And so how do we keep our grid stable, and how do we provide clean energy to that grid? It's it's complicated, but it's doable.
Yeah, it sounds like you say it's doable, but it sounds daunting. Like it just, to me, it does. But I'm sure you guys have it all in hand.
So there's a lot of people working on it for sure, and definitely making sure
Wonderful.
that the strategy's there and that we're going to have the power available to people when they need
And
it.
there's a lot of smart people working on it too, from my experience, from what I'm seeing from my angle. More and more people, we were talking about this earlier, how more people are curious or interested in where their power is coming from. And also the environmental impact. How do we include, the average person in the energy conversation? Like, is it educators? Is it curriculum? What energy means?
It's so important that we all have this conversation. I'm probably not the person that gets invited to dinner parties sometimes because maybe I want to talk about energy a little too often.
Oh, I'd love to
But
have
it's
you.
so important that we all understand, where's our energy coming from? And when we don't have it, that's when we think about it. It's like,
Oh,
oh my
yeah.
goodness, when is it coming back on?
Yeah.
But it's, for all of us to lean into the conversation about how do we get to net zero by 2050? How do we actually all work together for a solution? We all need to understand what's involved, and so I think up until recently, the energy conversation has been left with those engineers and scientists and energy strategy people, probably to the detriment of understanding, for everyone to understand what does it take to have clean energy into your home, into your lives, into your hospitals and your schools and your industries. And so we're trying to shift that. We have been bringing educators to the station for a conversation around energy. What does energy, look like? How do we get it? And then we take them for, a walk through the nuclear power plant to say, this is what nuclear power really looks like. It's not really maybe what you imagine. It's clean. It is, pristine, really. And that's one of the comments we typically get from the educators is, I didn't realize how clean this was going to be. And so we want them to understand this is how energy is made. This is what it really looks like when you're in the power plant. And these are all of the operators that work here, high degree of professionalism. Nuclear safety culture is like the most important thing at the nuclear power plant. And so we want them to understand, you can see a windmill and you can see a solar panel
Right.
on a rooftop, but you don't often get a chance to actually see a nuclear power plant and what's involved. And also, taking people to see a coal fire plant or a hydro plant. It's important for people to see, okay, this is where my power is made, and then it gets transmitted to the lines, and then it makes it to my home. We often think of the line and the home,
Right.
not necessarily the plant where it's actually coming from. Yeah,
That's
that's
correct.
important.
It is, definitely. Where does diversity inclusion fit into the climate change conversation?
As I said a little earlier, oftentimes we've left the energy conversation with those professionals, the engineers and the scientists and the energy strategists, and and it hasn't really served us that well. We are still struggling with having more women in energy production.
Mm-hmm.
When I joined, MD Power back in 1989, very few women were operators. Very few women were, electrical engineers and civil engineers, mechanical engineers. The engineering has gotten, we've been getting higher numbers, but we're still only at about 18 to 20%
Hmm.
women in the nuclear or in the energy industry. And so we need to improve on that. But I believe, and I'm biased, of course, because I'm a woman, but I believe we need more women in the conversation because, we're gonna have a different conversation. Women typically will be looking to the future of their children and their grandchildren, and what does this mean for my family? Men do too, but women tend to be a little bit more focused on the future generations.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely Indigenous people are focused on 7 generations out. And so we've been trying to do our environmental studies from an Indigenous lens. We've been trying really hard to have an Indigenous inclusion aspect to all of the work we do. Indigenous women, when you get that mixture and you have those conversations, it's just a different conversation. We need to have all of them. We need to have all of the conversations, and we all need to trust that we're all in this together and we're working together for future generations.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that one. In your professional opinion, what do the next 5 to 10 years look like?
So the next 5 to 10 years, I believe, are going to be that period of time when we're actually all trying to figure out how do we do this together.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm a member of Women in Renewable Energy. I'm a member of 1 Million Women, Women in Nuclear, Women in Energy. There's lots of opportunities to actually get involved there.
Right.
But there's also, many, many other professionals that are looking at how do we do this? How do we solve this issue of getting to net zero by 2050 and trying to collaborate and pull all of these networks together so that we're all having actually a progressive conversation, a positive conversation about how do we solve the issue,
Mm-hmm.
not how do we be divisive. We need to stop the division, and we need to stop saying it's this or it's that. It's everything. Anything that is considered to be a clean energy source needs to be included in the conversation, and we need to start knitting it all together so that we can actually, build the solution together. So I think the next 10 years will be identifying what the solutions are, coming together to actually put project plans together, getting our licensing plans in place, getting our environmental assessments done so that we can actually do the demonstration, of this is how these plants will operate. This is how they will integrate to the grid. This is how they will help to decarbonize industries such as refineries and pulp and paper mills, steel mills, and other mills like that, because that's another area that we have to actually, solve for. And then I'd say for the next 5 to 10 years, it's that solution stage. And then after that, it will be building so that we can actually make sure that we are creating a future for future generations.
Well, it's interesting to hear how you, at 30 years ago, you developed a strong interest in sustainability then. And you were very much an early adopter because not a lot of people were thinking at that time about sustainability. You know, um,
Well, yeah, no, that's a good. I mean, there were people talking about these issues way back in the 70s and probably earlier, and but the 80s into the 90s, the Brundtland Commission, the Commission on Environment and Development, and early talk of global warming, as we call it, instead of
right.
climate change, which is an interesting slight mistake we made because people still talk about global warming and they go, well, it's still cold, so is it really global warming? But of course, it's climate change, more extreme weather, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do feel I was part of a group. There was a lot of us, but we were definitely somewhat on the fringes. And people would say, "Oh, well, you're just, you're going to cost people jobs." And I was very interested in green economics and talking about, well, what if we can create jobs that actually has a more sustainable environmental benefit? And I do remember a lot of us in the 90s saying, if we don't deal with this, things are going to be really bad in 20, 30 years. So, of course, things are getting a little worse 20, 30 years later. But we do still have time to take action. And that's one of the ideas behind the Climate Story Network, is to pass on solutions at the community level about climate change and get that into community newspaper and share it on social media platforms.
Recently, I sat in on a webinar that you delivered with, what was it, Net Zero Atlantic, and it was about climate action, and it was about the barriers, to climate action, and I loved that segment where you focused on how there are a lot of people who there's a lot of blockages, and let's talk about that a little bit. Like, there's blockages, and then you also have some ideas of how to change that.
Yeah, so talking about climate change has its own set of challenges. Um, Climate change is not a singular event. It's many things. It's a slow moving disaster, so to speak. And for a lot of people, that trade off between short term benefit and long term can be really difficult. And climate change can be overwhelming. It can be very complex. It can be an overwhelming, even frightening problem. And some people that we may say are climate deniers, it's probably fear management. And I get that sometimes. Like, it's just so big and complicated that you have to have a bit of cognitive dissonance to get through your days if you work in this sector. There's fear of loss of jobs, of lifestyle, and there's a lot of other day-to-day things that can make it challenging. I mean, if you're if you're living on lower incomes, those immediate threats are your reality. And I think it's particularly bad right now. There's a cost of living, cost of housing crisis. Maybe you're not in a location that easily has solutions. For example, there's no public transportation. You could be worried about costs. There could be immediate threats from inequality. If you're in a historically marginalized community, worrying about climate change may sometimes feel like a luxury because you're dealing with discrimination right in front of your face, complexity paralysis. There's all these things. Plus, there's not the greatest reporting on climate change sometimes, and there's skepticism, there's lack of trust, there's active campaigns of misinformation, which is sad. I don't spend a lot of time talking to climate deniers. I don't have that energy. I don't think they're a large group, but they are a vocal group. And I don't think as a society we're not that scientifically literate anymore. I think we could go a long way to learn about that. But I think it's a large, overwhelming problem. People don't think their contributions can make any difference. I mean, the drop in the ocean kind of argument. And I get that. That's a challenging one to deal with. And then fear of job losses is really an honest and very strong reaction. I mean, if you got mortgage, you got kids going through university, just the cost of living. I get that some people are worried about the cost of things, which is why people have unfortunately successfully used things such as carbon pricing to just say it's a tax that's not needed. It's adding to the cost of living, even though the carbon tax is a minute part of inflation and in fact benefits more people the way it's set up now. So.
You mentioned earlier about complexity paralysis, and I'm curious, I guess that would be around the scope of overwhelming technical jargon. People don't understand that, would you say?
That's part of it. I mean, we talk about it, and I'm in the energy efficiency sector. We are guilty. We'll say 1 gigawatt of hour, but what does that mean?
Right.
I forget what it means.
Yeah.
I think the problem is it's more the scope of it. You have every country contributing, every different layers, but every human contributing. You have we're dealing with whether now that's the result of carbon from years ago, and we don't know how bad it's going to get, and the solutions are complicated. The solutions are not that complicated. We know what we need to do, but you have so many pieces: society, governments, bureaucracies, companies, organizations. Sometimes they disagree on the solutions. They're fighting. So you have people deniers. And then again, just the size of it. Like, what can I do? Climate change is so huge. And the drop in the bucket is a challenge. So I often say, let's shrink the bucket. What can we do in my community? What can we do in Nova Scotia? And the drops, it's a bit of a cliche, but they do add up. They're a bit of a gateway to deeper solutions and work. But the other interesting thing is we can talk about co-benefits. So if you take action around climate, you can also make our ecosystems maybe healthier, more diverse. You can create green jobs. You can empower Indigenous communities. You can create those types of jobs that young people want, so they'll stay in this region. So I think co-benefits is interesting. I think we can talk more about values. In general, from my background, because what I didn't say is that my second university stint was in adult education. And one of the foundations of adult education is you start where your learner is. And that's something that we in the climate sector can always do a little bit better. Sometimes we start with our organization, but you start with the people that you're trying to reach and go backwards. What's their values? What's their pain points? What might resonate with them? So we can do a little bit of a better job at understanding people's values and working there. Maybe it's community values. Maybe it's religious values, family values,
cultural, that kind of thing.
Cultural values. There's always kernels in there that we can talk about climate change within that value system.
As a sustainability consultant, when you're working with your clients, let's say, or taking on a project, I got this from your website. You have 3 points where it's collaborative, curious, and creative. So walk us through a little bit about your process, depending on the project, of course, but kind of tools do you apply?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So as a consultant, now wearing my business hat, I think context is as important as content. So it's really important for me if I'm working with a client on anything, be it some strategic design or communications or knowledge transfer, understanding the context is really critical. I do a lot of work that I guess could be called design thinking. So you want to know what's the context? And then you want to really think through the possibilities. What if we could do this? And then you start, what if, what next? Like what stands out, what makes sense? So for me, I am very curious. I still like people for the most part. And I am curious. I do like different cultures. Because I worked for so long, 20 years in international development, and had the very good fortune of working in West Africa and Thailand and the Pacific and the Caribbean. I love meeting other cultures and working in other cultures and understanding those contexts. So I find that really interesting. And then you have to be collaborative. If people aren't co-owners of the solutions, they generally don't work. You also have to embrace some messiness and embrace the fact that some things aren't going to work exactly how you want. And you build the road by doing. I think it was Moses Cody, the great Antigonish movement co-op pioneer, that said that. You build the road by doing, and make sure people are very involved. But really know your audience, their values, see how there is co-benefits on any project. And I've been lucky. Like I'm working with a hamlet in Nunavut to help design an energy efficiency program for homes, which is really exciting. And then working with a Nova Scotian company that's doing some carbon removal, not carbon capture, but carbon removal, nature-based carbon removal. It's all really exciting for me. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening. And so I'll be honest, like my informal slogan is I just want to do cool stuff with cool people. So that's where I am as a.
You mentioned earlier how, what did you say exactly? It's yesterday's or today's climate or today's weather systems are a result of yesterday's actions that we did. You know, so
Yeah, and that's
which is a fact. It's doom and gloom, but at the same time, we have to have some hope and optimism in there too to inspire people to take action. Because you
we
don't
do
inspire
need. I
people
mean,
by you should be doing this.
yeah, like guilt is not a great long term solution. It just isn't. We know this. Um, we can encourage solutions, and for those that aren't that interested in climate change, again, some of these solutions are creating really good jobs,
Mm-hmm.
and we can be a leader in green jobs and certain sustainable economies. So there's the co-benefits. I think we do need to support and promote a bit of cautious optimism. It is true that some of the effects we're feeling now are from things we did years ago, and that is the reality, which is why, some carbon removal techniques and work could be really exciting if there is a chance to turn the clock back even a little, buy ourselves a little bit more time. Um, Another thing I think those of us in the climate space perhaps have done a bit too much and we shouldn't have is we say we need to do X by 2050 or 2030. So we put these targets,
Right.
but subconsciously we've sort of created a situation where people think there's a lot of time. There isn't, but they're like, oh, well, we still have time to reach those targets. But of course, every year you don't take action, you have fewer years to really get into meaty reduction. So we do need to talk a little bit better, but we need to do this much every year
Right.
for the next whatever years to get there. But
And it's funny because you mentioned that, and I was thinking in the yardstick of sustainability, let's put it on your personal observations from when you started to where we need to be. Where are we on the yardstick, I guess, of sustainability? Are we halfway there? Are we
oh, it's
six?
yeah, that's a hard. I couldn't answer
Right?
that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's been great advances in solar energy and energy efficiency and more sustainable transportation, and that's actually really exciting because energy, of course, is a key part of this. So that's exciting. We need to do so much more.
Mm.
Nova Scotia is now looking at more solar, community solar, and interesting projects like that. As a society, we conspicuous consumption and buying cheap stuff that doesn't last is obviously an issue that we have to address.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of hope in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across the country getting involved very heavily in clean energy projects. That's exciting. You see it here in Nova Scotia. So there are some exciting things happen. We need to keep doing it. It's sad that we have to spend time arguing that climate change is real. I would
Yeah.
much rather us be arguing about who has the best solutions. That's what I would love to see. Every political party arguing over my solutions on climate change are better than yours. And we're not seeing that. We're just,
Right.
some parties are, but some parties definitely aren't. And it's hard to deny when you look at the data and year after year is getting hotter and the wildfires and the storms. And it's a little frustrating as someone who's been in this space for a long time to hear people still denying climate change.
Yeah.
But people smarter than me have said, if we're wrong, if climate change isn't as bad as we say it is, what have we done? Well, we've actually created more energy efficient homes, cleaner energy, more green jobs. If we're right and we don't do those things, the end result is much far worse. Worse is not really, or much far worse.
That works. Hi, Ruby. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Maria. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
I know. Like it's just fantastic how I was reading about your company and you're doing a lot of amazing things around behavioral change and that's where it
Mhm.
all starts. And tell us, about your commitment to conservation at Think Well Shift.
Sure. So Think Well Shift, like you said, is a behavior change organization that we are in resource conservation, energy efficiency mostly, but we like to what our motto is making change through choice. which is basically giving people some control over their sustainable habits. It seems like, sustainability is the trend right now. It's been the trend for a little bit. And a lot of people don't know where to even begin. They feel
Mm,
like they don't have control because we talk to people who are like, well, what am I supposed to do when the big organizations are the ones who are doing the most pollution and
exactly.
affecting the climate change and stuff? So people are a little more hesitant about just diving in when they don't have enough information.
Yeah.
So we now give people information and we break it down to a point that a regular person like you and I can understand.
Yeah.
Not like the engineers or like, like anything high level, like break it down so they can just understand basic things they can do to be more sustainable. And we give them the choice. We're like, listen, we know, like it seems like it's a lot. There's so much going on. There's so much information being given to you.
Yeah.
But let's try something as simple as small behaviors that anyone can do, like turning off lights when you leave a room, taking a shorter shower, turning off the faucet when you brush your teeth while you're just brushing your teeth. Simple things that they can control, right? And then
Yeah.
from there, we build into bigger behavior things and then jump into like things that cost money because most people don't want to jump into spending money right away, right? Like,
No. Yeah.
nobody wants to spend $2,000, $4,000 right away. But if you give them the small steps, the things they can definitely do on their own that are simple, and then once they're happy with that, and we celebrate with them, we're like, oh my gosh, you're doing all these things already. That's exciting and excellent. All right, awesome. You've got all this. Your house is energy efficient. You've got insulation in your house. Well, have you ever considered, potentially switching from oil heating to something
Right.
else? Because these are big spenders, and people are
Yeah.
always hesitant to just spend this money without information. If all they hear is, "Oh, it's better for the environment," yeah, but is it good for my pocket though, right? So we're giving people choice.
And it's those small steps that add up, like you
Exactly.
just said. No, I'm curious, what led you down to this career path of resource education, and what led you to here?
Honestly, it's such a funny story. I just, like I always say, I stumbled into energy efficiency. That's literally my phrase. I didn't know anything about it
Same
when I
here.
joined. I had no idea what it was. Like I used to hear the buzzwords and I'd be like, oh, there's something around sustainability, environmental education, energy efficiency, but I had no history on it. And so when I had my son, which would have been 2017, he was born really early, and it was just such a traumatic experience, him being in the NICU. And so I knew I just needed a kind of job that would let me be able to just like literally leave the office and go deal with my son. When we were leaving the NICU and we were leaving the IWK, they did say he would need a lot of care. And so I just knew that I couldn't have a career that would get me stuck, let's say, in a lab. Because prior to that, I used to work in like labs and I used to do working with adults with intellectual disability. And you can't just leave, the
Right.
house when you're
Right.
taking care of someone. So I knew that I needed something that was a little more flexible. And so I applied for a job with Think Well Shift at that time, which was an entry level job. And it was just more around talking to kids about energy efficiency. And I was like, I like working with kids. Prior to that, I had worked with the YMCA after school program. So I knew what it was like to be around kids and like, play with them and stuff. So I was like, I could do that. And I applied for it and I got it. And that's how I ended up in this career. My background is environment, like it's not even environmental education. I did bio and psychology in my undergrad. So I'm more of a like a people person than environmental education.
That is really interesting because so many people in this profession are engineers, or they have a technical science type
Mhm.
background, mathematical, that type of thing. But there is an industry for in this sector for people like us who,
Yeah.
because people need to be educated, people need to learn, and you don't have to have a science degree or an engineering degree to do it. So
Mhm.
that's great to hear. So what advice would you give to somebody who is thinking about getting into this industry? Who's not scientifically inclined as much.
I would say whatever your interests are, they fit into this industry. There's so much potential in like sustainability, whether it's resource conservation, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's like architecture, whatever you can think of, we have it on the side of the sustainability side. And it's pretty cool because
Mhm.
when I talk to people about like green careers, for example, we talk about what are your interests? What do you like to do? If you like being outdoors, have you ever considered something that's in sustainability with outdoor? Like you could be a horticulturalist, for example. If you like computers, have you ever considered like making things that are like the future, like so maybe like a like like how there's Google Homes. I'm always like, if you're like really interested in things like that, maybe you can create something that reminds people, hey, don't forget to turn off the lights or whatever. There's now like smart thermostats, stuff like that. So anything you are interested in can somehow fit into this world.
Great to hear. Think Will Shift. You do a lot of work within schools and with
Hmm.
school children, talking to youth. And how's that been? How's that been working out as you educate them to climate change?
It's pretty awesome. Kids are fantastic. Kids have a whole different perspective on life that I wish adults could just keep. Like, I remember being a child and just being excited about everything. And then, as you age and adulthood kicks in and all the stresses of adulthood kick in, we
Oh
like
yeah,
let go of that like childlike free spirit, and we get tainted, right?
yeah.
But kids are just so free, and so speaking to them about such important topics is necessary because they get it. I wish someone had talked to me about stuff like this when I was younger, because then I would have made very different choices in my, as I was like in my teens and my young adult life. But I didn't know any better. So,
Well,
imagine
they're
how many people
yeah.
could have known, right?
Well, their enthusiasm is contagious as well.
Exactly.
They take it
Yeah.
home to their parents or their, people in their families, and they share what they just learned, and they've got that enthusiasm that,
Hmm.
can teach. Kids have a lot to teach people. They really
Exactly.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So behavioral change.
Hmm.
It's all about that, and I guess there's some sort of science behind that. But what does behavioral change look like in terms of making that shift?
It's like I mentioned a little earlier, it's all about giving them a small step at a time and
Mhm.
like giving people gradual growth. You don't want to just dump all this information onto someone.
Right.
It's too much. Like the world is so, like I say it all the time to all my friends and coworkers, like we now live in a world that has way too much information. Literally at the click of a button, you have all this
Mm-hmm.
information. There's
Mm-hmm.
Wikipedia, there's Google, there's all this stuff that's just throwing information at you. You turn on the TV, on the news, there's more information being thrown at you, and there's just um like an overload of information for people. So when we're trying to like give people that behavior change around sustainability, we don't want to overload them with information around it. Like we're not giving them the you know high grade star level of this is where you need to be
Yeah.
right away.
You
We're not
guilt them
talking
into
about
it.
any of that,
Yeah.
right? We're starting
Yeah.
right at the bottom, like I said, about like, okay, do you take shorter showers? Have you ever considered it? And then we give them other facts they wouldn't know. Things like, oh, did you know that if you were boiling water, if you put the lid on the pot, it actually boils the water faster, meaning that you reduce the amount of time that your stove is on, and all this stuff.
Really? I
Like
never knew that.
yeah, I know it's a pretty interesting fact. But we give that to people so that they can start gradually learning more and more and more and be more receptive
Yeah.
to this information. Because if you give them overload, that's just like someone's gonna check out. Like
Yeah.
eventually they're gonna be like, I this is too much for me.
That's not for
And
me.
also we live in a microwave society that's like everything has to be done right now. So people kind of like freak out when it's like, oh my gosh, you telling me I have like 10 months to do all this stuff? It's too
Yeah.
much. So like we try to like gradually give them like information.
That's it for this remix episode of the Reimagined Energy podcast. Today's discussion reminded us that climate action isn't just about technology or policy, it's about people. Every decision, every conversation, and every step matters. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who care about building a cleaner and more resilient future. Thanks for listening, and let's keep reimagining what's possible together. I'm your host, Maria McGowan, and we'll see you next time.